Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brendan Slaughter here, joined by Beavers Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan and Beavers Edge writer Brogan Slaughter. We're coming to you guys with an Oregon State baseball season wrap-up podcast. Unfortunately, Oregon State's season has come to an end at the hands of Louisville earlier this week in an elimination game in Omaha. But in the words of the late great Dr. Seuss, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. And I tell you what, guys, this was one heck of a postseason. I had so much fun covering this postseason with you guys, that having the regionals at Goss, having the super regionals at Goss, all the memories that came with it. Going back even further, you guys remember the dog days of February when this team was playing in Arlington against, teams like Auburn or Surprise, and, the casual college baseball fan is not necessarily in tuned into those early games and, February, March, especially this year with Oregon State having such a road heavy schedule. It was a bit of a weird year, and I think it took fans maybe a little bit more time to kind of latch on and catch on to this team with, limited chances to catch them on TV and all those certain things. And I think as we got towards the postseason and Beaver Nation really started to rally out, we saw record crowds at Goss Stadium and just some of the most electric atmospheres we've seen. And the Beavers rode it all the way to the College World Series. They took down Louisville in game one, had a stinker of a game against Coastal in game two, had a game that we're going to dive into against Louisville in game three where didn't look so hot early. They made a amazing comeback in the ninth inning. Weren't able to get quite enough insurance to hold off Louisville. Louisville walks them off, returns the favor from game one, and Oregon State's season has come to a close. So, again, Ryan, I'm going to start with you. This was a season unlike any other that we've seen. I mean, even going back to the championship years, they never had to play a road heavy schedule like this. It was truly a year like no other. And this group of guys, they nearly circumvented the globe as far as miles traveled, and they left it all on the diamond this year. I mean, they very nearly had a chance to give us some more magic, but ultimately, Ryan, let's start with that game one against Coastal. It just, like, if that game could have gone a little bit differently, I think maybe Oregon State's maybe still sitting in Omaha. But you talk about just kind of the snowball that started rolling downhill for the Beavers with some negative trends. And it really started when Iva Arquette overthrew Jacob Craig, first batter of the game against Coastal Carolina. That led to a comedy of errors in that game. And then we saw Beavers were tighter against Louisville, but not as impactful in clutch situations. What did you kind of see in those two games that they lost, Ryan, in Omaha, where they maybe weren't playing the Beaver baseball that we saw in the regionals and super regionals that kind of had them at an all-time level this year?
Yeah, and now with obviously the season over, we officially sleep in July,
It's
so
true.
that is one thing I need to get out of the way first. But for those two games, that first one in particular against Coastal, like it seemed to give me shades of kind of game one against St. Mary's in the Corvallis regional, and then game two, Florida State in the super regional. I partly think a little bit of the fact is like, you're running up against Coastal's best pitcher there in game two, and you're not necessarily like I think you kind of let the moment become maybe a little too big. I think, and that's partly where like those errors and those kind of uncharacteristic performances, really cascade into things. And sometimes that's just baseball at the end of the day too, right? Like, you might have it one game and, you walk off an opponent and the next game, you're not doing so hot in there. And I think that was kind of part of it. Also, too, Ethan Kleinschmidt didn't have his strongest outing, I think, of the postseason as well, from what we had seen from the regional and the super regional. And that happens. You credit Coastal for getting him out of there as quickly as possible, right? I mean, that's exactly what the Beavers did with Wes Mendez in game three.
Right.
So very, very much driving up the pitch count and getting a limited amount of innings out of the starter. So I think you credit Coastal for that strategy on top of that. And then the final game against Louisville, I mean, I thought when you got to that top of the ninth and when you rally late, right? Like if you weren't able to capitalize more, at least get one, maybe two extra runs. Like I thought that that was game over basically right there. And when they weren't able to do that, then it was kind of a all right, this was the last gasp opportunity to get yourself a lead, and you are basically now trying to hope that, you can get those final three outs, force in extras, and then obviously we know what happened there. But I really where that was a byproduct of just kind of that not being able to get those hits when needed in clutch situations is leaving runners in scoring position. I mean, there were like 1 for 21 in that final game against Louisville. I think that's part of just, not being able to string along hits consistently. Also a byproduct of being a fastball dominant team, hitting
Hmm.
fastballs and not necessarily going for the off speeds and things like that. And Dylan Delvecchio, I think, said it best of like, hey, this is the playbook. This is how you slow down this Oregon State lineup. Like, there's no question that they got the talent. They got the hitters 1 through 9 to put up runs in any given inning. But if you're going to give them, the off speed breaking balls, like more so than the fastball, that's going to throw off their timing at the plate. And I think
Hmm.
that's kind of what you saw in the final two games a little bit, where I think going into next season, trying to be a little more well-rounded in that approach, not always going after the long ball, even though chicks dig the long ball. So there is a bit of that where I think if you can string together, I think more consistent against hits against really good pitching teams like Louisville, like Coastal. I think you'll be right back in this conversation again next year because we'll obviously get into the who's going to leave, departures, who you have coming in for next season, but I think that's more of where it was kind of like a feast or famine approach to a degree, always trying to
Right.
go for that big splash play, but not necessarily, stringing hits together consistently to cause havoc on the base paths.
Yeah,
So,
I couldn't agree more, Ryan. And I want to bring in Brogan here too because we were watching that game and the runners left on scoring position, and Brogan, you and I both looked at each other when they had runners at second and third with no outs in the tie game, and we're like, you got to get one across. You don't, and we kind of like Ryan said, we looked at each other and knew the odds were not great at that particular moment. But I'm curious, your thoughts too, because there were many times just to kind of echo off Ryan's point. Brogan, where there were hanging breaking balls that held up in the zone that were high strikes, but like a breaking ball that if you're looking for the breaking ball is a cookie to eat down the middle. Well, that bat just didn't come off the Beavers' shoulders. I would agree with Ryan. I don't think this team was great at hitting the off speed stuff this year consistently. And when you get to that level, it's no different than back in 2018 when Oregon State won the championship and Arkansas couldn't hit Kevin Abel's changeups to save their life because they were a primarily fastball hitting team. And we're like, he's not doing anything that crazy. How come they can't hit him? Well, he was just locating that change ridiculously effectively. So I think when you get to this level, and even Coastal's ace did throw a lot of a lot of hard fastballs. I just like I said, that Coastal game was weird, and then when you got to Louisville, you saw them mix in some more breaking balls and more high curves that would get called for strikes. And I'm curious your thoughts on maybe Brogan next year, looking ahead, like with the pitching staff they're going to bring back, maybe in fall ball that'll be something they work on a little bit, is letting their staff with their ridiculous stuff throw some stuff at these hitters and be like, hey, try to hit Dax's 12-6 curve. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just felt like, especially the hitting lineup, like they rode the momentum a lot all season. When there was the peaks, they were really high. Everybody was hitting well. When they were struggling, it kind of went throughout the whole lineup, and everybody was struggling as a whole. And I think part of it in this College World Series that we saw versus Florida State was really left hand dominant. Our lineup top to bottom is primarily righties outside of Tall and Macias if he gets a pinch hit. And then you go to the World Series and you're throwing a bunch of righties. You don't really have a counter to that off speed pitch, which for a right handed batter is going away from you. You're chasing at that slider down and away. If you have Tall, not doing a little better in the College World Series. You're confident in him coming from that left side, being able to counter that off speed pitch a little bit. But it did look, some of the hitters they look lost out there. And in that Coastal game, outside of a few deep fly balls, when you're timing up the fastball, Turley Arquette both put one up the wall, inches away from being out. Charles Schwab flies really differently up there, but just you need a different approach at the plate to be able to for all the kind of pitches that you're going to see. You can't just be timing up the 95, 98 mile an hour fastballs and praying, home run or bust.
I mean, and to kind of echo off that, Ryan, I mean, do you think, and this is something I want to get both your guys' thoughts too, as far as conspiracy theories go, Ryan, and I talked to Brogan about this behind the scenes, I think there's a very good chance that when Louisville had a runner on first, bottom of the ninth, and the catcher's interference was called. If you go back to the play before that, Louisville called an offensive timeout down 0-2 in the count right before that. And I told Brogan, I said, whether it was gamesmanship, whether it was pure luck, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was gamesmanship when LSU's coach said, hey, Weber's holding his mid out pretty far. Swing into it, you're going to get on base. And the way that it looks when you watch it on replay, might have been some interesting gamesmanship there, like a little, like within the bounds of baseball rule, because when you reviewed it, there's nothing to review. Like he hit Weber's glove, so no matter what, that's going to be there. But considering how rare that's called, I almost wonder if, Mitch Canham kind of had to get a taste of like just how intense Omaha is from a coaching perspective, maybe the little kind of chess pieces you have to play to get over the top. And I just think it's different being there as a coach than a player, because Brogan and I were talking about it. When he was there as a player, Pat Casey's pushing all those buttons as the coach. I think this was a great learning experience as a whole for Mitch Canham to kind of go up against some coaches who had been there before, obviously, especially Louisville's guy, and obviously Coastal's guy is the first time there, but had been there many, many times as an assistant coach with them. I think it's kind of like it requires a different level of strategy, maybe once you reach Omaha, and I think that's the secret sauce. You kind of alluded to it a little bit in your column, Ryan, and Pat Casey just had it. He knew how to motivate his players just the right way when they got to Omaha. They seemed to play their best baseball. Pat Casey would usually have a little, hidden trick, something coming out of his bag. Like again, we talked about, there's always, a postseason hero. And I think in some ways it was really good for Mitch Canham to get over the hump. But I think he definitely learned some things about the managing and coaching in the College World Series that will benefit him moving down the line. What do you think?
I would agree on that, and also too, I think with the way that rule is written, I think there is a way you can kind of take that to your advantage a little bit. So, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like even if that wasn't necessarily just from when you had the offensive timeout called, if you're Louisville and you're still able to get that, like you're gonna get on base anyway.
Right,
Like that's
right.
it's gonna be catcher's interference no matter what. But also too, I think it's like you said, I think it's a really good experience for Mitch to learn kind of at the next level what that looks like and get a taste of it and be like, okay, this is what I did well. This is what I didn't do well. And
Right.
this is what we're going to work on to improve to get back there for next season. And on top of that, like I kind of included in there and reminding people like Pat Casey's first trip to Omaha didn't come out with a title. It
Right.
was 0-2
To a
in
barbecue.
2005. Yep.
And as Beaver
And
fans have told
yeah.
me recently, Ryan, like again, I was quite young at the time, and again, I can look back at a roster, but most Beaver fans, Ryan, will bar none put their hand on a table and say, '05 was the most talented team of '05, '06, and '07. They didn't win the title, so that should give you some optimism going into the future. Not to cut you off, just want to throw that in
Yeah,
there.
yeah, no, totally, and that's where I was like, I was thinking about it the other day, and I was kind of making that comparison. I'm like, well, if this is like Casey's first time to Omaha and Mitch's first time to Omaha, and the players that were on that team for both of those years, right, basically saying, hey, look, like, and probably what this team is going to do going into next season is say like, hey, Taste of Omaha was great, but let's go win the whole thing. And you know who led that? That was Mitch
Yep.
in the following 2 seasons. So maybe this is their kind of moment where they'll have somebody on that team basically pulling that kind of Mitch Canham role and bringing this team back to the College World Series. Now, obviously, there's a lot of like moving pieces and things that we got to sort out in the offseason before that can even remotely happen. But I also think that's probably what they're going to use as motivation going forward, because they're like, look, we know the standard is the standard. It's not just making Omaha, it's winning it all. And that's something there where I think this team probably will use that to learn from, and Mitch I think will also use that to learn from as well. And in addition, like so in that Coastal game too, that's just baseball at the end of the day. Sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't, and that's just kind of one of those weird games where it's the ebbs and flows of a game like that. And if you're not able to kind of come back from that, then it kind of makes it harder to crawl back out of kind of a double elimination format kind of like that. But I think the Beavers have shown they can do that. They've shown that they can fight to the very end, and a predominantly road-based schedule like they played, I think ultimately benefited them. And I think you're seeing probably a much more well-rounded version of Mitch, where he's, I think, slowly growing into what Pat Casey provided this team, but finding it in his own way
Right.
of like taking those lessons and just going with the job and running with it and being like, okay, like this is, this takes time. This is, and finding that coaching style and his own voice and his own style of leadership, where I think you saw this year the team really adopted that mindset. And I think it's only a matter of time before, they do that again next season and try to make it back to the College World Series. So
Yeah, I think there's some apropos comparisons there, Ryan, and absolutely. I mean, like I said, a lot of Beaver fans still think of that grouping. '05 was maybe the best Beaver team as far as talent. You're talking about this guy named Jacoby Ellsbury, right? He wasn't on those '06, '07 teams. And, you could argue he's probably, I mean, he might be, one of the gold standards as far as pro baseball Beavs, right? But like Ryan said, they have heartbreak in '05. That's motivation for the next 2 years. And I think, along with Ryan said, Pat Casey learned a little something about '05 and then was able to take it going into the future after his first trip. So I think your first trip to Omaha as a coach is very different than a player, and it won't be the last time we see Mitch there. Then going a little further down the line, 2013, Oregon State makes Omaha, falls in, it would have been as though they beat Louisville and then weren't able to beat Coastal twice. So one game further in 13, that team had Conforto, Davis, some very big time players, pitchers, Ben Wetzler, Matt Boyd and others. And I told Brogan this story yesterday, that next, or that offseason, Ryan, Ben Wetzler, Scott Schultz, a couple other guys that were drafted in between like the 5th and 10th round were like, the heck with it. We're coming back, and decided to come back for their senior year in 2014. Oregon State was the #1 overall national seed. I won't talk about what happened that regional that year, but they were the #1 overall national seed. Then you go to 2017. Arguably, I'd say Oregon State's probably best team ever. That didn't win the ring. They were like Coastal, but on steroids. They had something like a 20 some odd game win streak going in, but they were 56-5, whatever it was. They lost to LSU in the College World Series. That was immense heartbreak, Ryan, for a team that lost single-digit games all year. And they lost KJ Harrison, who was a really big-time player, went into the pros, still playing pro ball, and Jake Thompson, who was a big-time pitcher. And then they had, a couple guys come back, and it ultimately, we all know what happened in 18, where, I think they had to have some new guys kind of rise up, but they lost some guys. And I don't think they were quite as good. They lost something like, 7, 8 more games the following year, but they won the title because they kind of had that secret sauce and they were motivated all offseason long. Like, just like this last year, guys, we talked about how the motivational loss to Kentucky in the Super Regional fueled them. And, now, Brogan, this team could sit there and, they could take a big Polaroid of themselves with sad faces in the dugout and put that up in the dugout to look at for the next, 10 months as motivation. And, we'll talk about the guys we think are coming back, but on the surface, if they stay healthy, which is a big thing in baseball, especially with guys on the mound, I don't see why they couldn't at least be one of the teams who they're like, oh, yeah, this team could make it back to Omaha next year.
Right. A big kind of media thing this year was there were no teams in this College World Series that were in last year's. It was eight
Right?
new teams. So you do need to do something consistently to guarantee yourself as getting a team that gets back there. And you lose guys. You're obviously losing Arquette. He's a top 10 pick prospect. You're probably not going to happen. Turley, unless he wants to come back, set the record so high that they aren't touched again, he's probably also gone. But a senior
He
year for Gavin
could.
Turley probably cements his records where they are. But you lose Weber, obviously. Hubbard's a great catcher, but you lose a leader. You lose a lot more than just a catcher losing Weber. You just need
Yeah.
the next guy to step up. You hope that can come from guys like AJ Singer, shout out Gold Glove winner, gets it done at second base, whether he slides over to shortstop, sticks around. That's somebody you hope you can hold on to and hope build into this next year. And I think it looks even better on the pitching side of things. You mentioned Keljo, off the top of my head, maybe Hutchison. I'm not sure who else is looking to get drafted, but you keep that core group of guys. You keep Dax Whitney, you keep Kleinschmidt, Eric Segura, Wyatt Queen. It's a really good rotation looking ahead to next season, barring anything that happens.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, just off the surface, I mean, we talked about it. I think it's all, I mean, there's no debate. I think Dax Whitney's going to be your ace. I think that is as lock stopped, and there's going to be so many scouts coming to Goss over the next 2 years to ooze at that kid. I don't want to, blow smoke where it's not necessary, as and orange colored glasses, as Ryan would say. But again, we've seen two number one picks in 6 years at Oregon State. That guy, like you think about like the Paul Skeens, like Dax Whitney could be like again, you want him to be healthy, you want him to have 2 great years, not have any setbacks. If that happens, I could see the sky being the limit for Dax Whitney. Ethan Kleinschmidt's going to be a talk about a guy that I'd like to talk to this offseason, Ryan, because I don't think anyone's probably going to be harder on himself than Ethan Kleinschmidt. And, he was still solid, just not his usual self against Coastal. And I
Mhm.
think that is going to be something that motivates the heck out of that kid in the offseason. And I think he's going to come back with a different gear next year. He's probably going to be your Saturday guy. And then you're gonna probably settle into Eric Segura on Sunday and probably have a righty lefty righty weekend set. Like Brogan said, you could get somebody like Nelson Keljo. I mean, if you watch that press conference post game, he kind of flirted with the idea. He's one that I think Beaver fans could maybe be like, "Hey, you want to stick around?" As opposed to like Brogan said, Gavin Turley's going to make an awful lot of money. No need to come back. And I mean, as much as I'd like to see it, that one would. I don't know what he could accomplish at the collegiate level, respectfully. But hey, never know if he wants to come back. He wants to come back. But no, I see the biggest kind of question marks for Oregon State, are obviously you're going to lose a key piece in the outfield in Gavin Turley. Pitching looks great. It obviously helps to have your rotation back. You also bring back DeCremer, Wyatt Queen. So I mean, you're deep. I mean, as Ryan put in his column, and highly would suggest everyone to check it out at BeaversEdge.com. Pitching is not really going to be a concern for this team next year, and I think that right there puts you into the shortlist for super regionals at best. Like I think right now you can lock stop and go. If they get like just the way they pitch, they are going to have a chance to be a postseason team, deep postseason team again. It's just can you get the hitting production? So you guys mentioned it there. AJ Singer wins a Gold Glove. Is that enough for him to turn down and come back? Right? He kind of talked about wanting to come back, but a Gold Glove, that's going to be something that catches MLB teams' eyes, right? I mean, just naturally. You've also got, like we said, Nelson Keljo, Trent Caraway, you guys mentioned Hutchison, a few others that could. And then Ryan, I want to talk to you about this too. Are there any guys that were injured this year that they'll get back, or any kind of up and coming freshmen who they think, who maybe weren't on the roster this year, who they think could be like the next kind of coming in this program?
In terms of that, I think I'm still kind of trying to figure out exactly of who that might be. But in terms of like up and coming freshman. I think we saw a little bit of what Carson McIntyre can bring. I
Yeah.
mean, kind of in here, is a guy that probably if you get him a little more consistency, a little more reps out in the outfield, I think he's a guy that you can rely on a fair amount. Paul Vasquez is another that I know Beavers are pretty high on as well, and then Ryan Vandenbrink as well, catcher. He's
Okay.
also somebody too that I've heard a lot about in terms of very highly regarded.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
another
Good to hear.
talent there that that Beavers can rely upon going forward in the future. But yeah, even too from a pitching standpoint, right? Like I also think that like it doesn't hurt, right, to add depth there at all. Like you want to try to be as deep as you possibly can. I mean, they're already deep enough from the guys that we've already listed so far. But yeah, really, it's more of a hitting standpoint where I think if you can, string hits together a little more consistently, replace your big key guys in Arquette, Turley, Weber, and depending on what Caraway, Singer do, if they decide to come back, great, that's awesome. Like you're in a really good spot, I think, going into next year. But if they don't, then that's going to be a little more, maybe the task is a little tougher, but at the same time, I think if you're Oregon State, right, like you don't rebuild, you retool, you reload. Like at the
Yeah.
second base spot, like you lose Travis Bazzana and you bring in a Gold Glover,
It's
AJ
not
Singer,
bad. Yeah.
right? Like
It's a fair
that's
point.
not bad at all. Like I think Mitch Canham said it best. If Singer's not a Gold Glover, then I don't know what a Gold Glover is, at all, right? Like, and he ends up being one this year. So I like the idea of Singer coming back. Caraway is kind of, I would say, up in the air. You kind of just have to see where he might get drafted at,
Yeah. You're gonna be at the
and then
mercy of the
yeah,
draft.
and then yeah, Craig as well. I think could benefit from coming back another year. But at the same time, though, it's more of like at the end of the day, if they want to go pro and start their professional careers, you respect that decision in the end,
It's
and you
true.
you you go with the guys you have next year.
One name that I haven't seen mentioned, Ryan, Tice Peterson. Like, solid year, but not necessarily enough where I'm like, lock, stop, he's 100. Do you think he might have a decision to make, or do you think he had a good enough year that he'll probably look to move on?
I think he'll probably have one of those years where he needs to like probably figure out his options and see
Okay.
where he'll go and if he wants to come back or not. I mean, it was kind of a little bit of a revolving door at times with first base and kind of the slump that both Craig and Peterson were in.
Sure,
And
sure.
so you didn't get a lot of consistency and power from that first base spot from a hitting standpoint. But also I more think of like kind of the flip flop between DH first base for Tice. I mean it was just kind of yeah, it's baseball, you'll have those slumps. I mean
Yeah.
Trent Carraway was in one, Dallas Macias was in one,
Holt went
uh
through one. Yeah.
Tall, yep, as
Yeah.
well. And so that's I think it's more of given the body of work, I think Peterson probably would need to just evaluate his options. But
Yeah.
I think like Craig, I think he benefits from coming back for another year.
One thing that Brogan mentioned, and I want to give him the credit for this, but I also want to get both of your guys' take on it. Brogan, you kind of mentioned when we were kind of talking about some of these draft eligible juniors, you're like, maybe it's one thing where like if one guy stays, multiple guys stay, or one guy goes, we kind of see a cascading effect. And we kind of saw that in a different way with like how Talia von Oelhoffen was the heart and soul of that women's basketball team. She goes and open the floodgates, right? And then we've seen it the other way, where like football this last year, Trent Walker stayed, whoosh, floodgates were closed, with the exception of a couple linebackers that went to go play elsewhere. But neither here nor there. But I'm kind of curious, Brogan. Do you think that's how it could shake out, or do you really think it's going to come down to where you're drafted, and when you see your agent calling you with the dot, or well, I guess not agent, but whatever it is, calling you with the dollar signs?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brokenheartedly brought up women's basketball. That was the correlation I was going to go to. One of them goes and they all disperse. And it's a little bit different in baseball just with how the pro system works and where you
Sure.
find yourself, ending up after you get drafted and how teams value guys age wise and draft eligibility and all that. But, who's to say your Cannon Reader, your Dallas Macias, they say, I want to prove more. I have an extra year. I want to come back, lead this outfield. I want to be a leader of the team. Canham, in an interview, he was just talking about building the culture. Starts back as far as when he took over with Adley Rutschman and finding the guys that build the Corvallis culture, and it just
Mm,
trickles down to the Gavin Turleys, where it's like they love being here, they love playing for this team, and they want to keep playing their college ball. So
yeah.
I think you just got to transition to the guys that are on the cusp, the Caraways, the Singers, the Readers. If you get those guys to stay, I don't see the younger guys fleeing off on their own. I think that they say, yeah, we got the pitching, we got the talent, like let's try to run it back.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where, like I said, the only real example that I can imagine or that I can think of in recent memory, and again, I don't want to put it in that it could happen, but I'll go back to 2013 when Oregon State went to the College World Series. And let me tell you guys, it was a big deal in July when Ben Wetzler and Scott Schultz, who were two pitchers on that team, and Scott was closer, Ben Wetzler was Sunday starter. So, comparable pitchers still get drafted high, and those guys were exactly like Brogan said, we love Corvallis, we love this, we want to go chase a national championship. That's more important to us in a year than going and chasing because there's also that part of it, right? So if you're a kid like Dax Whitney, for example, and obviously he's a guy who's going to go pro after his junior year, but like the fact that baseball is so unique where it's like if you are that kid, Ryan or Brogan, who your dream is to play for the Yankees, your dream is to play for the pot, whatever it is, and that organization drafts you out of high school, you're like, okay, this is awesome. I don't need that college because I got drafted. This is my dream. Now, those kids who are like, that dream's going to be there. I want that dream to, kind of diverge and take a little detour for a couple of years because we'll eventually get there. And, then I also look at it like, if you're here for 3 years of college and you already put off the pros for three, what's one more? Now, the other side of the coin is obviously the liability part of it. You see it all the time in football. Guys take out injury policies on themselves because you get injured your senior year, you're not going to get drafted. So as high, so there is that aspect of it, and I'm very curious to see how it all shakes out. But I really do think that there could be a couple guys who ultimately could decide to come back, and like Ryan said too, there's obviously the possibility of flirting around with the transfer portal. They got Arquette last year, so it's early. They were one of the final 8 teams. They weren't recruiting the portal when they were in Omaha. So I don't doubt the Beavers will have some interest and get some dudes who, this is not like the old days of like reloading where it's like, all right, you're going to be down for a year or two where you're waiting for the freshmen and sophomores to. No, you can hit the transfer portal. You find guys who are going to fit and plug and play as well as Arquette. And, you can kind of reload, not rebuild.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's basically the way that I see it. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces right now that this team is going to have to go through and sort through. And I think that when we will get a better gauge, I think of where this team will be at is post draft and what guys decide to do. And, like on that note, it's like, yeah, like that's exactly it. Like from what Mitch had said, I was like, I wholeheartedly agree with the culture here, Corvallis, what this place is, what this means. Like, heck, like I stayed an extra 2 years from undergrad because I love being around here so much. So that's something where it's like, as T-Baz said, like Corvallis is a special place, and like the fact that you get to build something here that will like basically transcend time long after you leave. Like I think that's also a very enticing part for for a lot of guys wanting to stay if they make that decision and think that is what's best for me and best for my career. But also too, like, like I also get for some of them, they're like, hey, look, like I'm ready to move on to that next chapter at the same time, and
Hmm.
so it's a tough decision, yeah,
It
but.
is.
I think we'll get a better picture of where these guys are at since their season just ended. And if they decide to stay, I think that's going to be really huge in the success of this team next season and just being able to make it back to Omaha and possibly win it all.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? I mean, I think you get a couple guys coming back and, you build out a schedule. Ryan kind of teased there might be some more home games next year a little bit, and maybe that's the result of playing a lot on the road this year. But yeah, I mean, again, it's obviously disappointing to not see, the Beavers in the championship series like we all wanted to see, but nevertheless, they were still, one of the top six teams when it came right down to it. And I think if you had told Oregon State fans going into the year, hey, you won't win it, but you're going to be sixth and you're going to make Omaha. I think a lot of fans be like, not perfect, but they'd take it because getting back to Omaha was so needed. But that kind of puts a bow tie on baseball. Just a couple minutes left in the podcast, but guys, I want you both here as we start to turn the page and obviously get into the summer. As Ryan said, July is kind of when we all take a collective breath and get ready because we do have some exciting news on the horizon. Not only do we have Oregon State Fall Camp coming up, and I know, folks, literally like 6 weeks from now, we're going to be talking some Malik Murphy, some Trent Walker, some Trent Bray as we're getting ready for the 2025 football season. But also have some exciting news to share too that we just haven't gotten a chance to share because we've been so darn busy with baseball here in just a couple weeks. BeaversEdge.com will be becoming part of the On3 network. Very excited for when that transition takes place on July 1st. For all of you that have been subscribers with us for a long time, it only is going to get better. Everything you get now with your subscription, even more cool stuff with On3. It's going to be awesome. More details to come. But yeah, obviously, as we're getting you guys ready for another awesome football season, happy to be making the transition over with them. And fellas, now we got to start to turn the page and start getting the football brain back on because we're going to blink and we're going to be seeing Malik Murphy throwing darts down the field here soon.
It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
I'm looking forward to it. And for both you guys, enjoy your summer. Until then, obviously we'll be staying busy and keeping things busy at BeaversEdge.com. We've got a few more spring recap pieces we need to finish up and getting you guys ready position by position for fall camp. And then July we'll be kicking off our Beavers Edge top 25 list, which Ryan and Brogan and I are going to start building here in the next couple weeks. So start ranking them Beavs, guys. It's going to be great. And then obviously getting
Josh
you guys
Green, number one.
gonna be getting you guys ready for fall camp. So I love it. We'll go ahead and wrap it up there. For Ryan Harlan and Brogan Slaughter, this is Brendan Slaughter signing off on this edition of the Edge Podcast, wrapping up Oregon State Beaver Baseball 2025, getting you ready for the summer and the start of Oregon State football 2025.